In this video, I want to talk about why I think that the counterfactual fairness framework basically doesn't make sense, and there are usually better ways to go about things. So, for example, I think the observational criteria that we discussed before make more sense. So, I should say I'm in the minority here, so this paper was very well received last year, and it's very well cited. That said, I think I'm right. So my first objection is that basically counterfactual fairness is a fancy way of producing demographic parity. Now, that is a fine goal, but there are easier ways to produce demographic parity than going through this whole process. So why do I say that it's going to produce demographic parity? Well, think about generating data from this model. So keep in mind that those variables are excluded. So now we'll generate aggression and experience over here. From those, we'll generate danger. From danger, we'll generate the number of accidents that occurred in the past. From that, we'll generate premiums. So by design, gender did not enter into it, which means that we have one distribution of premiums. Now, after the fact, kind of to the data that was generated this way, you can say, well, like here, male was 0, there, male was 1. You'll do it at random. If you do it at random, then you won't ruin the demographic parity that you've produced. So if you're using this model in order to generate the premium, essentially what you're doing is you're forcing the data to conform to this graph. If the data conforms to this causal graph, then there is demographic parity basically by design. So that is my first objection. My second objection is, I would say, the more substantive objection. So like I argued before in the previous video, this graph is actually bad in the sense that it does not capture all the causal relationships that you might imagine would be there. So in particular, I argued that there would be causal relationships over here between male and aggression. Okay? Like I argued in class, in the other graph, for different reasons, you'll also have a graph that's basically broken, where you don't have all the causal relationships that you would reasonably posit actually exist. So I think it's not an accident that the two causal graphs in the counterfactual fairness paper both turned out to be somewhat broken. The reason I think this is happening is that precisely the demographic characteristics that you might like to protect, those are the ones that have, in society, pervasive effects throughout the person's lives, kind of from the moment that they're born. And that means that basically all variables that you'd like to measure, that you think would make sense, would be tainted to one extent or another by the protected demographic characteristics. So in this instance, what I would say is, well, actually, this is tainted by gender. It's not actually independent of gender, so actually you shouldn't use that either, so you should just use experience. But if you're just using experience in this graph, well, okay, just, predict the premium from experience and be done with it. Don't go through the whole process of constructing the graph. So they kind of had to construct the graph in this way in order to show that this makes sense, so that you could infer aggression from the other variables and then use aggression in order to predict the premium. But in order to achieve this kind of nice effect where you can actually show that you can do something, they had to ignore some of the causal relationships that you would expect would actually be in the graph. I think that's going to happen every time you try to actually use this kind of model in the real world, which kind of means that this kind of approach is not going to be useful.